Well, it's still Tuesday night here in the West Coast. First thing Wednesday morning for those in the East. And either way, it is Biden time. Welcome
Mm.
to our State of the Union special, where we will also talk about the Supreme Court and, of course, Ukraine. All of it covered in the Supreme Court. In the State of the Union. As always, I'm Christian Bladt. And we were talking before we started, making his first appearance of 2022 on this show, our friend Scott Moore. I can't believe that this is the first time that you've been able to join us. But
It's so bizarre, especially in all the iterations of this show over the
yeah,
years. It's the longest period of time that I've not been here, and it's been kind of odd. So it's good to be back.
yeah, and it's great to have you. And no shortage of things to talk about
Hmm.
this week. We'd kind of settled into doing the show every other week for a little while, and then I realized last week when we were talking about the ramp up of Ukraine, I was like, oh my gosh, it's the State of the Union, so we had to be back, and tonight was the night. And I wanted to just start right there. I will ask you first, Scott, your overall thoughts for, they're saying that this is President Biden's first State of the Union. And I'm like, yeah, but what was that big speech that he gave last year? Like, it wasn't a State of the Union, I guess, but
Nope.
I remembered it, and I found a picture from it that I used as a thumbnail for this episode. But that was just a speech to Congress. So this was either way. This is the first time where he had a year of his track record as president to talk about. A track record that seems to be polling very low everywhere you look. So, how do you think that President Biden did for his first State of the Union?
Yeah, I know it is odd. It's an odd thing to realize that technically the first speech that a president gives in their new, presidency is not considered the State of the Union. It is a very odd thing, like you said, but technically it's not. And so this is the first State of the Union under the Biden administration, the first State of the Union for this president. And to be honest with you, I don't remember anything about his speech last year, regardless. So I'm guessing, again, it wasn't that memorable. And I don't think overall that this speech is necessarily that memorable. I think at the end, he did a very good job of ramping up the energy. And he definitely, as is who he is still trying to have bipartisan moments. So he had definitely his moments of being able to give a good presidential speech overall. But I don't think in the big picture it's really going to change anybody's opinions about this. I was looking before we came on, and some of the polling did suggest just that about 56% of people have no change of him or the president's or his presidency after the State of the Union speech tonight. So I don't think you're going to change a lot of people because what's happening on the ground and what's affecting people's pocketbooks, what's going on around the world with Ukraine, what's going on with the pandemic, and if that will continue to ebb and we'll be able to get back to more normalcy. Those are the things that are really going to affect his presidency, and also are going to affect the midterms and what's going to happen in November. And again, there's still a lot of time, almost basically 8 months until people vote on election day, the midterm. So a lot could change between now and then that could change people's perceptions of him. But overall, this one speech, like anything else that a president does, whether it's a Republican president or not, it's not going to really change things in the big picture. I think it was a good speech for him, and I think there are definitely moments that shone brightly for him. But overall, as far as if it's going to change day to day people's perception of him or this administration, no, not really.
Yeah, one of the comments that I saw on Twitter after the fact was a thought that I had is that it was a better written speech than it was a delivered speech. There are even in his prime, there would be those moments where old Uncle Joe would kind of get marble mouth and tripped over his own words. It's just sort of it's like more under a microscope now, because there's always this idea that he's too old and he can't focus. And so there were a few of those where you're like, oh,
Mhm.
he had a good point that got lost in what he said. I actually forget which one it was, but there was one in particular where I was like, it's like, oh, you had like 8 extra words in there. That was unfortunate. And I also said something that the transitions from topic to topic were not particularly smooth, and I hadn't thought about it, but I mean, that's sort of, again, in terms of presentation, I
Well,
think.
it's
Go ahead.
no, I was saying it's interesting you said that because that's exactly the things I noticed towards the end of the speech. In
Yeah.
particular, he was talking about gun control, and I went right into voting rights, and there was no transition there, and it was like I was like, oh wait a minute, now we're moving on from gun control to voting rights, and he did that towards the end of the speech, where I was almost wondering too if he was behind where he thought he needed to be, and so he was trying to catch up because I noticed more of a separation earlier in the speech, but by the time we got to those things at the end, I felt like he was trying to like get through it. But I don't know, but I definitely noticed it towards the end because it just flowed right into the next topic without any. And again, we're not here. A president is not necessarily the best speech person, a speaker that we've had. Obviously, President Obama shined in that, but when you go back and you look at Trump and you look back at George W. Bush, they were not good speakers either. So that definitely is a bipartisan issue, and that's definitely never been Joe Biden's strong suit, especially being a stutterer. And you could see that at moments tonight. But again, at the end of the speech is where he really was able to pick that up, and that's where I think he really shone brightly, where he got his energy level up. And at the very end, when he said, the State of the Union is strong, that's where he was able to really come into his own. But yes, definitely moments throughout. There were clunky moments, and you kind of cringed a little bit, like you were saying, where like, where it's just he kind of stumbled over his words. But that's always been him, regardless if he's 79 or 40 years ago beyond. As a politician, that's always been not his strong suit, which is understandable as someone who was a stutterer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It just, it's a reminder. And I did notice that, there is sort of the traditional approach, which is to almost right away, or at least in the first few minutes, say the State of the Union is strong, or you could say that it's
Mhm.
good. He saved it for the end. And I
Mhm.
remembered that there had been one recently that it was at the end, and that was 2016, I guess,
Mhm.
President Obama's last State of the Union. And he said it towards the end. And I
Mhm.
remembered that this wasn't the first time, and there were people asking online if it had happened before. And you had people, of course, very quick to illustrate that that was the most recent time. So it wasn't even that long
Yep.
ago. It is
Mhm.
an interesting approach. I think that if you started this speech saying the State of the Union is strong, I would be like, really? But I think he did a good job in painting the picture first, and then letting us, that basically the State of the Union is strong because the people are strong. And, there there is this idea that I think the question of are you better off than you were a year ago? I think there's a lot of ways that people can point to they're not. There you can point to things that cost more, specifically the cost of gas is always the indicator that we get a lot. Excuse me, from the media, but
Mhm.
I think when you think about a year ago, where we were in terms of the pandemic and just the 2020 election and January 6th were so recent. I think in a lot of ways is as hard. I think it's just it was so bad a year ago that we could only be better off in that way. And you can of course point to things, as I said, economically, the situation in Ukraine, which we'll talk about. There are things that are worse, but just sort of if you take the United States in a vacuum, you take the people and where we are, I think it's actually better. Joe Biden is in a worse place because he was much more popular. He still had sort of the new car slash not Trump smell. It was like, oh yeah, this is the thing that we wanted. So, what do you think about that? That the idea of comparing where we were when he took over as president.
Well, to your point, exactly that. I think last year, and that's why it's not a considered State of the Union, right? Because a president, theoretically, I mean, back in the old days, it would make sense. It takes a while for a president to be able to get up to speed on what's happening across the country and all that. But now it's obviously not the same thing. That's why there was such a separation between election day and March before they were inaugurated, because it took a while to travel and things like that. But now ostensibly you could have a State of the Union, but at this point, this is the first full year, once a president's in, and that kind of, like you said, that new car smell has faded, and we're getting into a routine of things. And kind of back to your point too about with the State of the Union is strong and waiting to the end. It was funny. I was also watching it waiting. I was like, oh my gosh, is he going to say it or did he forget to say it? But I realized it made sense to put it at the end. And I was wondering if they had done several versions, and before Ukraine was invaded, was it in a different spot? Was it towards the front? Was it always going to be towards the end? Because obviously a big chunk of the time was spent talking about Ukraine at the front end, so it wouldn't have made sense to talk about the State of the Union being strong at the front end. But I was trying to figure out if that was something he was going to wait towards the end, regardless. But to your point, I mean, yeah, if you look at a snapshot in time of where the country is, where it was a year ago, definitely most things are better, including the economy. I mean, granted, yes, we are dealing with unprecedented inflation. We've been dealing with supply chain issues caused by the pandemic, and now we're dealing with a this Ukraine invasion and the horrendous aftermath of what's happening there right now and what's going to continue to happen. But as far as us as a people, like you said, we're hopefully finally getting beyond the worst of the pandemic, and it's going to become endemic. And hopefully, I mean, now with the invasion with Ukraine, I mean, the gas prices and some other things now that we thought could be more temporary may be a little bit more permanent. So these costs have increased and this inflation has increased, and that's definitely what people are focused on. But the economy itself is incredibly strong, and he brought that up as well. Is like he has under his watch seen some of the biggest increases in employment, and the fact that we bounced back from such a severe short-term recession caused by the pandemic quicker than anyone ever expected, and better than almost every other country on earth in our recovery. So there is a lot that can be said for where we are as a country and how good everything is, relatively speaking. But like I was saying earlier, it's how people are feeling. And people are going to vote depending on how they feel. And if they feel that even though they have an opportunity to work, but now they have less money because they're spending more for everyday items, and they see when they go to the gas station they're spending more, or they see that they're spending more at the grocery store for something that they spent last year much less. Those are the things that are going to affect Americans when they go and vote. And so that's going to be the issue, not one speech tonight in, well, now March. But I think overall, again, he did a good job on covering the bread and butter issues for the Democrats without going too far on the progressive wing. I think he did a good job at least trying to continue just who he is, of trying to reach out and be bipartisan. I think that's just who he is, and he's going to continue to do that. He took a few swipes, at Republicans, especially with the tax cut law of 2017, and a couple other moments where he definitely took swipes at Republicans. But overall, he was definitely more into bipartisanship and also not going after the progressive wing, especially when we talked about cops and not defunding the police, which we saw was a losing strategy for Democrats to begin with, and that was more from the progressive wing. And he was saying fund the police, and we want to be about safety, and that's how Mayor Eric Adams ran in New York. So he was definitely trying to touch on more of those centrist, bipartisan. Kept bringing up how many bipartisan was over 80 bills he said that he signed into law over the past year. They're bipartisan, and still had a nice, good appeasement to the bread and butter issues of Democrats. It came to healthcare, when it came to making sure that we passed infrastructure bill, the Voting Rights Act, talked about gun control and not impinging on the Second Amendment, but how we could have common sense gun safety laws. And I did really appreciate the very end there of the speech where he was reaching out to LGBT Americans as well, and I thought that was important. And it's such a departure from even Obama had done it towards the end, but it was nice to kind of see the LGBT Americans recognized, the trans Americans recognized. So there was definitely, going after those bread and butter. Can't say that tonight. Democratic issues that he did well on, but not going to the extreme with the progressive wing of the party. So it was trying to do a balancing act there. We'll see if it works in the long run, but
Yeah, and I think a lot of ways when you're doing the State of the Union, you're kind of checking in on it. It's not really one uniform viewpoint. It's the people say that you'll hear the term about how there's two Americas, and I'm like, well, there's kind of a lot more Americas than just two. A couple of things that you referenced relate to that. One is the pandemic. I mean, you can go to places in this country where they're like, what are you talking about? It's been over for a while,
mhm,
and it's hard to not be cynical when 2 days before the State of the Union they lift the mask mandate in the Senate and in Congress in general and in Washington D.C.
mhm,
And it's you always have to wonder stuff like that. It's like, well, it is a midterm year, and maybe they're doing it a little bit earlier than they would. Um, for me personally, we've talked about this, Scott. Here in Los Angeles County, when fully vaccinated people can choose whether or not they want to wear a mask at the gym, that is the one the one place where I hear people talk about all the time. It's like, oh, it's so hard and I can't breathe. It's like, no, except for when I'm on the treadmill. That's like the one time where I'm like, man, I love
mhm.
the idea of not wearing it. And that was last Friday. And you better believe I showed them my Vax card on Friday and I was like, yeah, put it on file because
Yeah.
I'm not wearing this. I
Yep.
I wore it when I went in, and then once I started exercising, but look, it's and that's just sort of just personal experience, but in general, I mean, you have a lot of people who it is not, President Biden talked about sort of the way that people are still dealing with it, and I'm like, I think a lot of people just aren't dealing with it, and I think the way that it is more manageable now than it even was a couple months ago. Spoken as someone whose whole household tested positive for COVID not that long ago, just 2
Mhm.
months ago, which means I've only got one more month left of a freebie of extra antibodies from having had it. But and I think it's good to address it because even people who live in places where that have been open for seemingly for most of the last 2 years,
Mhm.
like Florida and Texas, but it's impacted, I think, economically, and there are things at the federal level. So I think it's important to talk about it, and
Yeah.
as you rightly highlighted, the issue of really all LGBTQ issues. There are very different. That I believe those issues have always stood out in a way that there are going to be some very different opinions on them. But now that you have Texas, which is planning to actually, I believe they actually brought their first case against parents who raised a child as transgender, just trying to make an example out of them. And you have the don't say gay law in Florida. And, you have people that think that taking this stance on on these issues are what's going to help them sort of get to a bigger stage. So I think it's important to highlight, and I think that I hope that somebody heard President Biden when he said that he reminded the trans community in particular that he has their back, because I think that you had 4 years where you really felt like the White House didn't have your back, and now that you're sort of getting a lot more pushback at the state level, I think it's important to establish that. But what do you think, sort of, about those two issues, really? That COVID and LGBTQ issues really aren't. It's another example where it's a very fragmented series of issues at different levels.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. And I do agree with you. I felt a bit of the cynicism too, where all of a sudden they're finally lifting the mask mandates out
Right.
here too. And look, I agree with it because at some point, and we've said this, and I said this last year on the podcast, that at some point you have to go back out and live your life, and there's greater risk for a vaccinated and boosted individual stepping outside their door than COVID. So at some point you have to go back out and live your lives, and I've been waiting for, and understandably I know in LA County it's a very densely populated county with a lot of health people with health issues, so I understand it to a degree, but at some point to go back out in public you need to be able to do that, especially as a vaccinated and boosted individual should be able to go out without a mask in most instances. So yes, I do feel it's a little bit of politics because we saw blowback with Eric Garcetti and Gavin Newsom at SoFi Stadium a couple weeks ago, and celebrities out and about. And then again, you're seeing it tonight. And I saw some people post on it, some of my Republican friends, about, oh, look at the whole Senate and everybody, is maskless, but yet they're still for a while having kids wear masks to school. So I understand that that has definitely been politicized, and rightfully to some degree it has been. On the fact that Democrats were pushing on the mask mandates longer than maybe was necessary. But at so many levels it's fragmented, and that's what's confusing too, because you think, okay, you have the city of Los Angeles, for instance, and you have the county of Los Angeles, but you have different municipalities that have their own health departments, like Pasadena and Long Beach, and they could all have different versions of what's going to happen, and that's across the country as well. And then you have the state level, so it gets very confusing on what you can and can't do. And so the hope is that we can finally get to a more uniform level in most places, and most places will be okay. We can now be maskless or whatever. So it's a more consistent policy because it is confusing. And just seeing everybody tonight kind of gave that hope in a way that we're heading back to whatever our new normal is going to be. And obviously, there'll probably be spikes in the virus when we get later into the late summer and the fall, but hopeful that we can kind of get back to a sense of normalcy and we won't have all these crazy levels. But it is fragmented and it's been politicized, unfortunately, and so that's not going to go away as we head towards the midterms. But I do think things like that and LGBT issues, the broader culture war issues are here as long as politics and, let's say, the Republican Party, um, and Democrats to some degree on the culture wars as well when it comes to abortion. As long as they feel that that can be a winning strategy for them, they will continue to do that. If they feel that they can't win at the polls, let's just take the Republicans, for example, because the trans bill and the don't say gay bill are in Republican run states.
Sure.
If
Yeah.
they don't feel that in a longer term run that that's going to work for them politically, then they'll move on to the next culture war issue. Right now it's been that and school issues and local level issues, critical race theory, all those type of things that have been playing in Republicans' favor on the culture war issues, which has worked for Republicans in the past, and that's why they go back to that playbook. So as long as they can feel that that's politically advantageous for them, they will continue to do these wedge cultural issues, and we've seen it going back years and years and years. I mean, that was part of the thing with Ronald Reagan in 1980. So it's been going on for a long time. And on the flip side, it's the same thing with Democrats. If abortion becomes an issue and Roe gets overturned this summer by the Supreme Court, then you could see things turn around, and that's going to become a political issue for Democrats in the midterms. So the parties do it when they think they can win. I think for most Republicans, well, I mean, I think the whole trans stuff is terrible, anyways, when you deal with kids, but that's a whole other personal issue. But I think most Republicans, the garden variety day-to-day Republicans, don't care one way or the other about this issue, in the sense of like they don't have a problem with it. But again, they feel if they can win politically, they're going to make that an issue. And that's just politics, right? I mean, that's the same thing why you have so many Republicans that continue to support Donald Trump's lies about the 2020 election. Most Republicans know that he lost fair and square and would like to move on from that issue, but because it's still part of the core consistency of the constituency, that they're going to continue to support this thing. And it's the same thing when you have Democrats and certain issues that they may not want to agree with, but they feel they need to pull in the direction of their party, or what their party leaders are saying. So it's just part of the game overall. And the hope is that these wedge issues, especially with the trans LGBT gay issues, don't become something that's going to be successful at the polls for Republicans, so they can move on to other things, which they did for a bit. With gay marriage, once that, when they had all the gay marriage ballot initiatives across the states, and once they started losing them, they moved on to other things. So I believe this will be the same case. It's just going to take some time.
Yeah, no, I think that, and I think as when it comes to critical race theory and it comes to, trans related issues, you're mostly in those states, you're going for the headlines of it, because it's not
Right.
like critical race theory as it's described by, I'll just pick a name out of the air, maybe Tucker Carlson. It's not really something that's in the schools, not in like elementary schools, and also, I mean, I think that there are laws about, you can't get you can't actually physically transition if you're under 18. You can't start the hormone therapy for your child if they're still a child. You can talk to them, and I think I might have said this on this show last week, or I might have brought it up when we talked on the Blackcast, is this idea of when it is that. So what's the difference? And it's sort of like a half joke to say, but it's like, look, we all grew up, and there was the girl in the neighborhood with the really short hair that wore overalls, when you're like 8 or 9 years old, and she played with the boys, and she probably was more of a daredevil than I was. And so it's like, what does that fall under that category? And it's such a subjective law, and I don't think it's actually important to any of the people who are responsible for ratifying it, the people who are going to enforce it. It's just more about, does Greg Abbott think he has a chance of being president, which he doesn't, by the way, but does he think that, I don't think Ron DeSantis has a tremendous chance at being president, but I would say he has a better one than he does. But a friend in the chat, Sam Whitfield, I know thinks differently than I do when it comes to that. And I'm sorry, what were you going to say, Scott?
No, I was going to say, and Greg Abbott had to go further and further right because today was the Texas primary. So it's like, how far right can you go? But it's always ironic to me when you think about trans children, when you think, Republicans always preach about how important it is for the local level and how important it is for parents to make their own choices of their children. But then at the same time, when it's not something that they agree with, then it's not okay. So, when the parents want to have the decision on how they want to treat their trans child, whether they put them on hormone blockers or whatever they do, that should be up to them and their children and not the government. So it's always ironic when this type of stuff comes up in the culture wars. But again, to them, it doesn't matter that it's hypocritical because it's politics. But and that being said, same thing with critical race theory. It's become a blob that just became bigger than itself. And if you ask almost anybody, they don't even know what it is. But the fact is, it's become this evil thing that the liberal agenda is doing because it's been decided by certain people of like, this is what it is. But again, they don't even know what critical race theory is. They just think it's bad because somebody that they like politically said it's bad. So it's like these issues become bigger than the actual selves if they didn't become politicized. But again, that's part of the game. And if Greg Abbott thinks not just for his future office aspirations, but if he thinks he can be further right to make sure that he wins the Texas primary vote, then he's going to go further right and do what he needs to do. And that's sort of the problem right now with politics because of the gerrymandering and everything else. You don't really have, that's where Joe Biden kind of is a throwback to an older era where there was bipartisanship and you had more moderate people in office and they had to appeal to more than just their extreme base. But now with gerrymandering and everything else, you just see that there isn't really that middle ground anymore. It's like you're either far, far, far left, you're far, far, far right, and you're in these safe districts. And then at the national or at the state level, you now tend to vote for who you vote for president. And then you vote for that same person for senator. And now you're seeing it more even with governors. I mean, governors are still an outlier where you can get a Democratic governor in a very Republican state and vice versa. But you're even starting to see that shift too. But now you see the senators are the same party of who a state voted for president, whereas you used to see a lot more variety there, where senators would be Democrats from Republican states and vice versa. And so you're not seeing as much anymore. So Joe Biden is kind of still that kind of that throwback of bipartisanship that just really doesn't exist at the same level that it used to. And it'll be interesting to see how that pans out in the midterm. And that's why I also don't think you're going to see. I mean, yes, I do think Republicans are going to win the House, but you're not going to see the gigantic swings anymore, I think, that you used to see. You'll see the shift of Congress back and forth, but you can see how tight it is now in the House and the Senate. And I think it's going to more or less stay the same, where you're going to have a hard time having 60 plus senators, which is why the filibuster, whether you like it or not, is going to become more of a factor in the future, because you're not going to see the wide swings. You're going to have a super majority in the Senate with one party or another going forward, and same thing with the House. So it's interesting. I thought it was an interesting approach that Biden was still trying to go after that bipartisan sort of vote, but I think it was also probably smart with everything going on right now to try to go and appeal to other people.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a good point. People don't really split their ticket the way they used to. For the most part, although interestingly, I guess we did see it a lot in 2020. People just, you had Republicans who were just not going to vote for more Trump, but and that was the point about all these allegedly fraudulent ballots. It's like, well, yeah, but I mean, all these other Republicans won, just the one at the top of the ticket didn't done. And honestly, for me, it really comes down to just laziness of researching candidates and not really knowing. It's very easy to just, I'm going to vote for this party because in general, that's what I'm registered in. That's whose primaries I can vote in. And there might be somebody in another party. There might be an independent that is really saying the right things, but I'm too lazy to figure that out. And I think a lot of people feel that way. It's like, why are you going to take the time? I wanted to stay on the State of the Union for a moment because, as you pointed out, President Biden had this opportunity to talk a lot about Ukraine in the beginning. And I think that the actual conflict, the invasion, doesn't help President Biden in any way. But in terms of this setting of doing the speech, he did have something to talk about that the majority of that room and the majority of the people watching at home are going to agree with. And he did make it clear that we're not sending troops over there, to engage, and like here's what we're not doing. But this is a bad guy. And there was that really weird, like at the very end, when he's like, go get him.
Go get him. Yeah.
But you weren't talking about him anymore.
I know, that was weird. I was going to bring that up too. It was kind of a weird end. I was like, wait, what? Are we talking about Putin? What are we doing? Like, what do you mean go get him? Like, I was doing the same thing at the end. It was a little odd.
Yeah. And, so you have this, an issue that a lot of people are in agreement of. Now, if you go back a few days, basically before the weekend, there was this kind of narrative of, Putin's not such a bad guy. Well, or it's also my favorite take was, we have to support Putin so that we can own the libs. And I'm like, what? And it was like, you're just seeing some pictures of some of the people that were speaking at CPAC. And I'm sorry to disappoint Sturridge Ed resident. We are not going to spend time on former President Trump's speech, but there was someone speaking and there was literally a picture of Ronald Reagan behind him. And I was just like, what of anything that he said or did would make you think that supporting the president of Russia would sit well with Reagan or his supporters, just that idea. And pretty quickly they got away from it. Even former President Trump, before his CPAC speech, was talking about how, what a genius it was. And look, you can say that someone who you consider to be a bad guy can be very smart. But I think
Of
that
course.
the indication was that this was not a particularly smart move, because the level of commitment that Putin had to this invasion of Ukraine, it seems to, if they had thrown their whole might at Ukraine, I think that it would have happened over the weekend. But it's like, if you put your whole military and you focus on Ukraine, it's like, if you're China, then you're like, yeah, this is kind of what we are waiting for, right? Look how distracted they are. You know, let's let's just blitz the Kremlin. So, and there's a great video that cuts back and forth for what Tucker Carlson was saying about Putin on like Thursday versus
Hmm.
yesterday. And there was that moment, and I was just like, I, I don't know. I mean, look, if Trump were still president and this were happening, would you have some people on the left that were like, well, Putin's better than Trump? Of course, you'd have people that said that. But I was just surprised that we had it at all. The people who were saying it were high profile enough. And you realize that it didn't work. It's exactly what you were talking about in terms of the issues. Like, oh, this is not going over. I have to back off on this and get on the Putin is a bad guy bandwagon, and it was really quick, wasn't it, Scott?
It was, and like you said, it's one thing for people to fight about in social media, like you said, if the roles were reversed and Trump
Yeah.
was president and Putin was invading. There was actually a whole thing about that, I think, in the LA Times or something this weekend about basically that same thing. Like, there was a slice of either side that were saying, "Oh, they like Putin better than Biden," and vice versa. It was Democrats like Putin better than Trump. I mean, so of course you're going to see that extreme on both sides. But you're talking about like everyday voters. But when you have politicians and high level people and people that have a megaphone like Tucker Carlson talking about, it was so stupid when he was saying something about like, "Well, has he ever called me racist?"
Yeah.
And talking about how he was anti-gay and all these other things. I'm like, yeah, calling you racist or whatever. He's over in Russia. Like, you're not having an interaction with him. Like, in the sense, it was like a weird way of even trying to support him in a way of like, well, he's not sitting there in New York where your studio is. It was bizarre. So even the way he was trying to support him on those initial days was very bizarre. Um, and obviously he had to turn that around pretty quickly when he saw the severity of it. And like you said, just politically, it was not working when you see this continuing to happen and these innocent people being injured and killed by this invasion. And having someone come into a sovereign nation to do that is just mind-boggling. So it's mind-boggling, like you said, that it was even an issue at all. And that's the thing that I think is sorely missing from us, that in a way that throwback with Biden, with bipartisanship, it was like there were things that we all agreed on as Americans, and this type of thing, which again most people do agree with, and most people are supportive of what we're doing there, and as far as not sending troops in and having the modern warfare, which is economic sanctions and ways of being able to affect a government and a regime that we don't agree with without sending in troops. And I think that's part of modern warfare. And obviously, the downside to that are these cyber issues that are also potentially a bigger issue that most people aren't thinking about for modern warfare. But it is different than just sending in people and injuring and killing people and then having a stronger army steamroll over somebody. It's these type of tactics are part of modern warfare, which means we don't have to send in our troops. And it is a very difficult situation with Ukraine because it's not part of NATO right now. So the NATO rules where, a fellow NATO country is invaded, it would be different stories. So
Yeah.
let's say Russia had invaded Poland or Romania, then that means US troops would be on the ground because that's part of the NATO deal. Like, when one country is affected, we're all affected, kind of thing. But it is more difficult when you have a country that like Ukraine that's not part of NATO to then send in your troops. And it's fair or unfair. That's just sort of the way of the world order right now. But I think we're seeing that change where it's like we're not sending troops, but we're sending ammunition and support. like Germany, even Switzerland, that's famously neutral, is doing that. So when you see the collective world coming together in a way of modern warfare like that, I think that most Americans support that because, like we said, we don't want to be in forever wars. We got out of Afghanistan as botched as it was. We got out, and we
Yeah.
all agreed that we needed to. And so, yeah, I think that that kind of stuff is crazy now that we all can't support a situation like this, and it becomes politicized again, and you have people embracing Putin over our own country was very kind of surprising.
Yeah, just for a quick moment to circle back to Tucker Carlson, you're on the wrong side of an issue when the segment where you talk about something on your show is broadcast on Russian television, just feeding into their propaganda.
Hmm.
It was like, see, look, this is what America thinks. And yeah, that part of this was surprising. But I think that the figure who comes out ahead in all of this is Zelensky. And honestly, you just have to figure this is a guy who's going to stay. He was a comedian, so he has the line of like, I need ammunition, not a ride. Ultimately, I don't see a scenario where he comes out of this, but it's more about standing his ground. And I would hope to be wrong about that, but it seems like it's you know, the what Ukraine is doing just seems to be, buying themselves some time.
Hmm.
But you're seeing, at least, for people in Russia to take to the streets and demonstrate anything, that is a lot ballsier than at least any modern day protest here, because for
Hmm.
the most part, we get to go outside and say we're not happy about something,
Yeah.
you know. But that when that you're going to get arrested, and possibly much worse, it's you're seeing bravery from a lot of people. And this idea of talking about knowing you're on the wrong side of an issue for Switzerland, who is the definition of we're not getting involved, like this isn't my problem. For
Hmm.
Switzerland to be like, no, this isn't good. And what you really have to worry about is this idea that obviously Putin probably never really right in the head, but just the question of like, where's his mind at now? This has to be so infuriating for him that it hasn't gone the way he wanted it to. And you're hearing these stories of just really young soldiers who didn't realize what they were being sent to do. Then they run out of gas, or they run out of food, or they run out of both. And it's obviously, you assume that these are accurate portrayals of what's happening. But I don't know. I don't see how this is resolved quickly. And ultimately, I think you're really poking the bear, literally, when it comes to these sanctions for Russia. When Putin and all of his friends can't get at their money, it is very effective. But and to this point, actually, Sam Whitfield again says, I'm not a fan of Putin. I'm glad to hear it, Sam. But also not a fan of the John Bolton neoconservative types. I think we should send troops into Ukraine. There is that voice of
Hmm.
saying, like, here's what we need to do. And look, I can understand. It's like they need help. I think that that's what Zelensky's asking for. Is like, boy, it would be great if you could, you know, send some troops my way. But that's where you cross the line of getting into you can be supportive up until a point. How do you see this playing out, at least in the near future, Scott?
Well, yeah, and to his point there too, the problem is if you start putting troops on the ground there, now you start potentially opening the door to a wider war, and it becomes a lot bigger and spirals out of control. Um, and that's an issue that's very real. But yet, to your point, I think Zelensky could not be the better face for the Ukraine movement of being a young president who's an actor, a comedian, so he knows how to work those cameras. And I mean, you could not have a better face for a president than him right now at this moment in
Yeah,
time.
and
But
just
you're
to
absolutely
jump
right.
in, I love that like earlier in his career, he was like on a sitcom where
Yeah,
he ended up being president. I just think
yeah,
that's it's
yeah.
very
That's right.
funny.
It is very funny. But like you said, it's biding time right now, and it's hard to see that this is going to end well. Because at this point, Putin has nothing to lose. So it feels that it has not gone how he had expected. He thought Ukraine was just going to roll over. He was going to come right in and have it done in a weekend, and people would just kind of, okay, now Ukraine is part of Russia or whatever, and look the other way, and then it wouldn't affect them. But now that's taken longer, and now these sanctions are becoming more and more intense and constricting the Russian economy. Um, it's hard, it's like, is he going to be like, never mind? And now the damage has been done. But now that he's got nothing to lose, that the damage is being done with his country economically, is he just going to go in even more intense? And that's the scary thing, that it could just ratchet up the violence there. And because now he feels he's got nothing to lose, and he's got to go in and take this over, because he's already gone in and he's already experiencing these sanctions. Um, the only change that could maybe affect that is if enough people within the government and enough in the military in Russia start to lose confidence in him in this mission, and he doesn't have that control anymore. Then that's where you could see that maybe things will turn a corner uh, more positively for Ukraine. But it's hard to see that. Like you said, I feel that now this door has been opened, it's going to be really difficult to close it. And how is this instability going to play around the rest of the world? Like you said, even with China and other countries, like all these other countries are now looking to see how this is happening, to see this playbook. If they were thinking of other things, for instance, if China wanted to go into Taiwan or other territories like they feel are rightfully theirs, like Russia felt with Ukraine. So this is an interesting moment in the world order on how other authoritarian governments are now looking to see how this plays out and what they might learn or not learn from the situation on their own future. Uh, I want to say endeavors, but if they
Yeah.
do feel that they should go in and attack. But at this moment in time, I don't think it's going to be an easy thing, and I feel Putin has nothing to lose but to ratchet it up and go all in, and try to take what he can out of Ukraine now, since that's already happened, unfortunately. But the next few days will be very telling to see what happens in regards to that, as far as the military and the government. And like you said, are the protests going to get bigger in Russia? And that's the sad thing, is that the sanctions are definitely going to hurt Putin and his wealthy compatriots there. But what about the everyday Russian now, with the value of their money, that the little money that they have and their economy, that now it's going to affect those people and hurt those people on a day to day. It's hard to say, because these sanctions are a little bit more laser focused than things in the past. But you look at other countries, and they've been getting by for years with economic sanctions, like Cuba. It's like, here we were thinking, oh, we'll do this back in the early 60s and Cuba will become a democracy. And here we are 60 plus
Yeah.
years later, and the government still functions. And same thing with North Korea. So Russia's a very big country. So there's a lot that they can be able to withstand. And I think at the end of the day, that's what's going to keep them to be able to go further and longer than most people realize. It's just now their everyday citizens are being shunned around the world, which is the sad part, because like you said, a lot of Russians don't agree with this, and now they're being shunned by the rest of the world. And sporting events, concerts, other things are just not going to happen anymore. Like, those everyday people are being affected that don't
Yeah, they're
necessarily
not
agree with this.
Russia's not even gonna get the new Batman movie this week. That's,
Right.
and, sort of what you're talking about, Cuba, it's 60 years and you still can't use an American credit card in Cuba, and to that end, that was, something that we saw in Russia. I believe that was from today. There was just this backup of people trying to get on the subway because, if you don't have Apple Pay, you can't just tap your phone, I guess is what people are doing, so people needed cash. And
Hmm.
as President Biden mentioned, the ruble has decreased 30% in value. And those are the people that it's getting hit, where it's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it shouldn't, these aren't the people that you should be punishing. When you saw that video of the guy who's like one of Putin's buddies just railing about losing his villas in Italy, you're like, well, yeah, that's the price you pay for, if your business card has the word next to your name oligarch, and
Right.
BFF of Putin,
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of funny. People, when somebody's yacht was sank, as I forget what that story was. I admittedly only read the headline on that one, but
Yeah.
the other one, the guy with the Italian villas, I mean, there's
Yep.
video of him just railing on this. And it's, if enough of this ruling class, look, Putin seems like one of those guys that's really well insulated, but if there's enough hurt for enough really rich people,
Mm-hmm.
even Putin is, well, you know what? Even Putin is not bulletproof, and I'm saying that literally, because
Mm-hmm.
if they're like, no, Putin's the problem, we're not able to get out of this. And yeah, I mean, you're talking about the sporting events, just the Russia's not able to compete in FIFA, the football slash soccer.
And the World Cup.
Yeah, no, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's,
And the World Cup.
and you can feel for the Russian people who don't support this, and they're probably terrified of ever saying anything against Putin. But it's how you're able to make this thing happen. If you're not going to commit to sending troops over, which I think is the right call, by the way,
Right. Mm-hmm.
this is the sort of thing you have to do. So I do agree. It'll be very interesting to see where it goes. I think anyone, and I've seen this quote from a number of people, anyone who thinks like, oh, Putin would never use nuclear weapons. I'm like, really? Do you understand this guy? Because I don't know that much about him, but it's like, what about Putin makes you think that he would never? Maybe he is, even if it's like 10% likely to do it. I would not say it's out of the question that he's going to drop a nuke on Ukraine or take it out on one of these countries that are getting a little too uppity, just teach Switzerland a lesson. We were talking about them before,
Yeah,
uh,
well, and it was interesting because President Biden even said in passing when a reporter asked him yesterday, are you concerned that Putin's going to use nuclear weapons? And Biden was emphatic and said no and walked off. And granted, he's not going to be like, yes, I'm worried and freak out everybody out. But
yeah.
he was so emphatic about the no when he walked off, that I was sort of surprised by that too. Because to your point, that's the thing, especially when someone feels backed into a corner and they are all in, who's to say that they wouldn't use nuclear force at some point because they're backed in a corner and they have nothing else to lose at this point? And that's where you do have that concern too, is like, would they do that when they feel they have no other choice now? And like you said, the sanctions are hitting them and their friends, and they've lost a ton of money, and the invasion isn't going as planned. Then why not throw it all out there at that point? And that's what's scary about it, because you just don't know how far it will go. And then from there, is other countries going to feel threatened? And do we get into a wider issue, or a bigger war? And that's definitely still out there as a possibility, and that's what's a little bit unsettling. I think that's why a lot of Americans are feeling unsettled beyond now, just getting beyond COVID. It's the economic issues, and now you're seeing these global issues at play too. So it's like we've moved from one traumatic situation now to another. So it's got a lot of
Y-
people on edge, and that's why people aren't feeling as good as they would normally feel with an economy that's bouncing back so
Yeah,
prosperously in
and I
general.
mean, it's slightly tongue in cheek, but you can kind of understand the stress that this is that we're not all the way out, but we're pulling ourselves out of the pandemic, and then
Hmm.
we potentially end up thrust right into World War III, and it's like, man, we just can't catch a break. you
Hmm.
know, I thought that these were going to be the fun roaring 20s,
Right.
and yeah, I think that the way that the world is positioning itself is making a point, and I think that other people should learn from this. except for that prick in Belarus, who's literally the only one who's like, oh, no, we got Putin's back. Like, this is our excuse to go invade, to go send troops over into Ukraine. Although I do love that apparently that guy had a map that he shouldn't have had, that had some future troop movements for Russia on it, that they were going to go to Moldova. Whether that's accurate or not, I think it's very funny. Before we run out of time, I did want to talk about sort of a big thing that was touched on in the State of the Union, and this would have been sort of like, basically the major story had it not been for Ukraine. President Biden's Supreme Court nominee, which he did campaign that he would nominate a woman of color. Judge Ketanji, I said her name wrong, Ketanji, I think, Brown Jackson. I did watch that press conference, and I thought, it was one of those very nice little stories that she had, sort of, and then her track record. And, just the fact that she is nominated by a Democratic president, and one that is considered to be unpopular. I just want to know, Scott, how is Mitch McConnell going to try to say that we should not be having confirmation hearings for Judge Brown?
Well, I know it's I've had people have the same discussion too, and look, at this point, um, even McConnell doesn't have a leg to stand on here. He could try to twist things as much as he wanted to, but he can't, because we're so into the new term of a president. But also, it's not going to change the ideology. McConnell already got what he wanted. He
Yeah.
held off on Obama being able to select his pick when he should have, and he hypocritically let Trump pick his third pick. So McConnell already knows it doesn't change the ideology, the makeup of the court. And he also knows it's too early in a president's term. I mean, you could say about the unpopularity of Trump, and he was able to get three justices picked. So yeah, McConnell doesn't have anything to stand on, and also because it's a midterm election, he's going to want to try to be like the statesman here, and they're going to want it to go fairly smoothly because they don't want to be painted in the bad picture. It would look very bad for them if you have a bunch of old white men um, throwing trash at a black woman. That it's going to serve the Republicans no goodwill at all to be able politically to make it difficult when they know they only need a simple majority to allow this justice to be seated. So they're really, in my opinion, are not going to make it into a big thing, and then they'll want to come back and say, "Look, we handled it with dignity, like statesmen, as opposed to the Democrats did with the Kavanaugh hearings in 2018." And that's how they want to play it politically, because they feel that's going to work in their favor when they run for the midterms. So I don't think you're going to see a big pushback, because they know that I think they'll still probably get a couple of Republican votes, to be honest with you. I think maybe Lisa Murkowski, possibly Susan Collins. You could look at 53, maybe even 54 voting for her. So I don't think it's going to be an issue. They'll want to act like they'll be asking pointed questions and, going with the advice and consent of the Senate. So they will want to play the role to a degree, to a bit, but they know that they can't stop it, and that the Democrats have the votes to be able to seat her. So they'll do that role to a degree, but they're not going to want to be too hard pressed on it, because politically it will not look good for them to do so. So this will more than likely, unless something major comes up about her that has not been vetted, which I cannot imagine at this point with the vetting that would go through, she's going to be seated, and it will be relatively pretty easy confirmation, in the sense that it won't become a big circus event.
Yeah, Sam brought up something that I thought of when we were talking about. Biden tried to deny Clarence Thomas. The difference there, it was a black man. There also were legitimate concerns for how Justice Thomas conducted himself. The fact that we know about Anita Hill, and the fact that this 30 plus years later, I still know about the pubic hair and a can of Coke. The fact that stuff is still with us. There was a reason, but for Scott's point, the Republicans, I think you're right. I don't think they're going to make a big deal about this, because it is a simple majority. I think
Thanks to Mitch McConnell.
Amy Coney Barrett, which she got confirmed like 50 to 48, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
so. And this could pass with 50 votes. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and that's all they need. So you're not going to win. You're not going to be able to stop it. So yeah, all you're doing is, I think we talk a lot about optics, especially in politics these days, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, a bunch of very old, very white men, really just sort of digging in on this woman of color, who I think a lot of people will. I think a lot. Sympathetic is probably the wrong word, but people will find her relatable, I think, in these hearings. And yeah, I think you're right. Ask a couple of soundbite sort of questions that will make the rounds. Like, see, look, they did their job. But yeah, and look, about Trump having 3 nominees. I mean, 2 of them were exactly when he should have been able to nominate them. It's really that third one where they rushed at the last minute because
Well, I
they
would say one of them was, and that was Kavanaugh, even though he was not the best pick, because technically the Neil Gorsuch one was
was,
taken away
well,
from
that's true.
Obama.
Yeah, but
So,
by the time that Trump took office,
right,
you know what I mean? Like, it was,
right,
but you're right that
yeah,
that should have been
technically,
the Merrick Garland spot. You're right,
right,
but yeah. So but my focus was really on the third one.
right, right.
The Amy Coney Barrett, just the level which everyone went to get her in there, and also, you were replacing a liberal justice with a conservative one. I think that was the
Mm-hmm.
biggest concern. But yeah, I feel like this, and we'll obviously be able to focus on this when they have confirmation hearings. But it seemed like one of those ones that, like you said, if she was not properly vetted and there's something, I don't know who's in charge of that then. You know what I mean? Like, how there could be any surprises at this point. But yeah, and look, I think that it's I don't know. I want to always feel that the State of the Union is strong. I don't know how much I've felt it, and it's not just this year. It's not Trump's last year. It's not just the pandemic. Just in general, the union itself, the people together. I don't know how strong it is, but I
Yeah,
like to think that
exactly.
we as Americans are strong. And when there is something that we can, agree on almost universally, Putin's a bad guy. It's nice to see that there's at least something, even though there were those minutes we talked about, those early moments where it seemed like it was going to be yet another partisan thing. That I don't know. It's like everybody except Oliver Stone seems to be on board
Well,
about
and
about
and to the
Putin.
president's point, and it's very true, and I've said this before too, there are more things that we agree on as Americans than disagree, but it's become such a hyper partisan. But the fact of the matter is, he is absolutely right. Everyday things, the majority of us do agree on more things than we disagree on. We really do, as a majority of a country. Even though to your point too, is I don't feel we're as strong as I'd like us to be. But it's so easy now for people to go into their corners, like we've talked about with social media and the echo chambers, and it's gotten even worse with the pandemic when you were isolated and in your house and not able to go out and socialize. And now every day you can only interact with people that are like-minded to you, and so you have no reason to ever leave your bubble, and that's what's dangerous. But at the end of the day, big picture things, we do agree on most everyday things more than we disagree. Taking politics out of the equation, and like it was the same saying to my dad, because even like when the halftime show was becoming politicized for the Super Bowl, it's like, can we just have a couple things, that don't have to be seen through a partisan lens here, when we're watching football and everything. And there were certain things where it's like, in general, I was like, okay, we're all watching the Super Bowl. And there are a lot of people, they're going for their teams or whatever, but there's going to be a lot of conservatives and liberals that are going for the Rams, and same thing with the Bengals. And so there are those type of moments where I'm like, yes, there are things that collectively more of us agree on than disagree. And we just get into our little corners and we hyper focus on certain things. So I do agree with the president on that that is something that I do hope will keep the country strong in the sense, in the big picture of things, we do agree with more than we disagree, even if we have our corners we can go back to.
Right. Yeah, and I think that there's no better indication of just how divided the country can be than a State of the Union, where you have, you know, one half of the room that barely stands up to applaud for anything, and then the other half, you have Chuck Schumer just jumping up ahead of everybody, and then having to sit back down because he was like, he didn't have the memo on when the applause line was. And it's funny to watch that, sort of
It is
the
so
way
funny.
that, and look, Democrats do exactly the same
Well,
thing
exactly.
when Trump is president, when George W. Bush was president, the way that the other side, whichever the other side is, just sits on their hands. And then there's a couple of issues where you're like, oh, we do have to stand because they're saying, we have to give money to our troops. And
Yeah, it was interesting. They did that with Susan Collins. They kept
yeah,
focusing on her a couple times, and she was getting up and applauding. And I thought, oh,
yeah,
that was kind of
yeah.
interesting. That
And
they
you
really focused on
mentioned
her.
it, but I thought it was very important when you say we don't need to defund the police, we need to fund the police,
Hmm.
because this is a midterm year. If you want to have any chance, you need to not have some of those more radical far left ideas. And I don't think that there's anything about Joe Biden's very long body of work as a politician that would make you think that he's coming out against defund the police as a political maneuver. I think legitimately that he did not think that it was a good thing. It's just if his party had felt like it was a winning issue, then who knows where he would have gone. But
Well, you're right, and
uh,
that goes back to what we were saying earlier with the trans issues with Republicans or the cultural issues. Yes, if that was a winning strategy, I think you would see that the president could go to that side if that was really a winning strategy. But we talked about this even last year in the podcast that the defunding the police has never been a majority thing, even within the Democratic Party. It just
yeah,
never was. You had some very zealous, and again, rightfully so, how they want to feel about an issue on the progressive wing of the party that were very big on that. But the majority of Democrats did not agree with that at any point during the time, and obviously Joe Biden is one of them that has never been on that. And Mayor Eric Adams, same thing, was never obviously with a police background, but one handling New York City, that was never an issue that he was ever for either. So the majority of Democrats were never on that as an issue. And politically, we know it's not a winning issue, anyways, because we see it right now with crime increasing in most places
yeah.
of
I
the
mean,
country.
you mentioned New York City, and you just the amount. I mean, just subway crime alone. You hear terrible stories seemingly every day. Just about attacks and things like that, and you're just like, oh yeah, I think that is a city where they need to double fund the police, or
Hmm.
whatever it takes. And Sam mentioned something. He did not watch State of the Union. He did watch. Our mutual friend Larry O'Connor had a tribute to the late Andrew Breitbart, who did pass away 10 years ago today. And I
Hmm.
have talked a few times about how that was someone that I knew very well. And to have read about the fact that he passed away when he was only 43, it's just so crazy to think about. And for people who think that they know who he was from his media persona or the brand, the legacy that continues. I knew very few people who weren't even completely disagreeing with him politically, who didn't enjoy his company and enjoy sort of having those conversations. But also, he was one of the just the nicest, most fun people that there's no one better to have sat at a day game at Dodger Stadium than Andrew. And it's somebody that I miss on the personal level. I know a lot of people miss on sort of a political level. And I can only imagine what he would have thought about the last 10 years. And
Hmm.
some of which people expect he probably would have, but you never know. He was always full of surprises.
Hmm.
So that's there were two very large figures that he was someone that I knew. And when Tim Russert passed away before, was it before the 2008 or the 2012 election? I think it was the 2008.
Years before,
Yeah.
yeah.
And Andrew passing away early in 2012, a political, presidential election year, obviously someone passing away is tragedy, but you just sort of think about what those years meant to them, just sort of in their career. And
And both
it's
of them were
just,
so young
oh,
too, that
yeah.
had so many more years to
Yeah.
be able to contribute, and that's what's even more devastating about it too. Even just not even from the personal level for you, but just in general with what they
Yeah,
could have
and
had
look, I
to
think
give.
that the reason why I always point it out when it comes up is just you can think what you want about things that the appearances that he made, the fact that there is a website that bears his name, but it's always important to remember that he did leave behind 4 kids, and his wife Susie is a very delightful person, and his kids are practically adults now, which is crazy to think about. So it's I'm glad that Sam mentioned it, and yeah, Larry's a good guy. He does mornings in Washington D.C., morning radio, and he was a good friend of Andrew's as well. So Sam, I think your time was probably better spent for you personally, because I don't know what you would have gotten. And yes, thank you
Yeah,
for Storage Yard
2009. Yeah,
Resident
that's what
too.
I
Yeah,
thought. It was right
2009.
after.
Yeah, it was right
Yeah,
after. Oh yeah, it
yeah,
was right after. But thank
yeah.
you, Storage Yard Resident. In any case, we went a little long, but there was so much to talk about, and there'll be so much more to talk about next time. So, Scott, if people want to keep an eye on whether or not maybe you have some tweets to send at Mitch McConnell during
Yep,
confirmation
right
hearings,
here.
right there.
SMN80.
And yep, and
There
you
we
can
go.
find me at Christian DMZ, and please subscribe to the Blackcast YouTube channel. You'll get this show when we do it, and I know that the scheduling is very inconsistent, especially big event nights like this. So if you subscribe, you'll always know that's coming. Storage Yard Resident always seems to find us, though, and we
That's
appreciate
right.
that.
Yes.
And of course, tomorrow we'll have our show Marvel Movie Talk, and we have the titular Blackcast. And on Friday, we're starting our Star Trek Picard after show, season 2 of that show. So please
Right.
check it all out. Subscribe. Thank you to everyone in the chat, but predominantly Storage Yard Resident and Sam Whitfield. We appreciate everybody who tunes in.
Mm-hmm.
That's all the time we have. We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.